Thank you. It's good to be here and to see you all. I'm going to talk about myself. I grew up in New York, and I had friends who were black and yellow and any other color. And I became involved with the freedom movement in 1963, when I was already fully grown, and went to Washington in 1963 with a group of young men and women to hear Martin Luther King speak. And I was a member of SNCC, which was founded by John Lewis, and a member of CORE, because what was going on down south and in many other places I found intolerable. And Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech in the Central Park of Washington, D.C. I forget the name of it.
The mall.
The mall. Yeah.
The mall. That was all? It didn't have a name? Like Henry's Mall?
I think it's John.
At any rate, it was a very difficult time because there was a war that I thought had no sense or meaning. Where was it? Vietnam. The war in Vietnam lasted for 20 years, although not every year was a year of fighting. But between 54 and 75, encompassing the murder of the president, after whom I was named, John F. Kennedy. He was murdered on November 22nd of 63. But the story goes back 100 years to 1863, when Lincoln was president, and he passed the Emancipation Proclamation saying everyone was free, there should be no slavery. Of course, we were in the middle of the Civil War, and we had to win that war in order to free the slaves, which he did. And so the South never accepted that. And to be blunt about it, it pissed me off. And so I was drafted to go to Vietnam, and I refused to go. And so they sent me to a psychiatrist instead. They couldn't understand why I would refuse to go. They asked me if I was a patriot. I said I was. I loved the country. I just hated the war. It didn't make any sense to me. I wanted to go to Vietnam as a peacemaker. They didn't have any. So I joined the Peace Corps. SNCC and CORE wasn't enough for me. Besides, they had folded by then. And so I became a volunteer in the Peace Corps, and I asked to be sent to as close to Vietnam as I could get. And the closest I could get was Malaysia. And I served for 2 years in Malaysia, teaching at the University of Kuala Lumpur. And University of Malaysia in Kuala Lumpur. And when I showed up, there was a riot on campus, and the students were struggling against troops that were there. And a student of mine came running up with a bomb. I said, "Hey, what's that?" He said, "It's a dud." And I looked at it and I said, I'm sorry. I'm glad it didn't go off. What's that got to do with me? And I said, "Show me that bomb." And he handed it to me. He said, "You're American, right? You can fix bombs. Americans are famous for that." I said, no, and I looked at the bomb, and on the side it said, made in GB. I said, this is an English bomb. And he said, yeah, but America makes good bombs, right? I had no way of knowing that. But a fake bomb? Anyway, my students had many questions about America and why we were not fighting against Great Britain, because they were. Malaysia had was part of Indonesia and had previously been part of was a Dutch colony. Well, they rebelled and they fought against it and they got their independence because Great Britain by that time had taken over. And they didn't want colonies, at least unhappy ones. My students had many questions about America. Is it true you put your old people into nursing homes? I said, sometimes. So we never do that in Malaysia. We keep the family together. Don't you want to keep your family together? I said, well, I mean, there's exceptions to everything, right? And he said, is it true you put your pets into their own cemeteries? I said, well, I never heard about that, but it's possible. Teaching was a challenge because of the strange ideas that they held. And so I fought back by saying, why are you fighting? Why are you supporting this war in Vietnam? They couldn't answer that. And when I got back to I said, we don't have that, any slaves or anything like that. They thought that I was lying. And when I got back home, I found that there was some truth. Although we didn't have slaves, we certainly had oppression and prejudice. It's still present. And we celebrate not only the heroes who were opposed to slavery, but some of those who were in favor of it and who were slave traders. One of them was Braxton Bragg. I didn't know that when I moved to California and moved to Albion because I was into communes. And Albion, especially back in the 70s and 80s, was a hotbed of communes of one kind or another. Well, I outgrew that, and I moved to Mendocino, which was expensive, and I got married and bought a house in Fort Bragg, where I still live. I didn't know at that time that Braxton Bragg was a slave trader and a Confederate general. And I wondered, why are we celebrating that, or him? And I realized, well, we're not. It's just the name of the place, and we're stuck with it. But are we? Are we really stuck with it? If we moved to Germany, would there be a place named Hitlerville? I don't think so. Why are we keeping the names of our slave traders? I asked you that, and perhaps our next speaker can answer that question for us. Paula, your turn.